I'll tell you a tale of cricket and ale and Phyllis and daring do. They met on a shield, are fetching fair fields, 10 and 1 plates 4 to 2, with leather and willow.
It's really great to see everyone here, and we're going to kick off with Clara, who has been researching the history of mutual aid and who has put together a super Pecha Kucha presentation on the historical background of mutual aid. So Clara, over to you.
All right. Okay, so actually I'm going to have to do this by hand because I haven't quite worked out the controls. I don't trust Google's timer. So I'm going to rattle through. Please start waving at me if I'm going over time because I can stop. So first of all, what is mutual aid? Mutual aid is solidarity. It's not charity. It's a voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources and services for mutual benefit, where people take responsibility for caring for one another in challenging conditions. It's really good at filling in gaps. It provides bursts of energy, incredibly creative, and it's incredibly creative at solving problems. It's not asking permission when you see something that needs to be done, you just do it. So many of the projects of mutual aid is around food. It's such a basic thing to feed people. It's physiological well-being, the most basic level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Black Panther Breakfast Club in the late 1960s ran successfully in many places for many decades. Kids needed to start the day with good, nutritious food, and they went ahead and fixed it. So it looks different wherever it is. It responds to the needs of the community from which it was created. So if there is a need for housing after a flood or hurricane, mutual aid gives shelter and builds housing where local government can't or won't do it. So let's look briefly at the relationship of individual to state, because very quickly when you start reading about mutual aid, you start getting into some pretty nitty-gritty details. So yeah, I'm not going back as far as the ancient Greeks, but I'm going to go back to the Enlightenment. So these people, Thomas Hobbes and Rousseau, talk a lot about individual state freedoms and responsibilities. So lofty conversations about civic society, laws, and man, the foundations of the modern era. So Thomas Hobbes, he says, without proper laws, individuals will be living in constant fear, leading to perpetual war. Law is the will of the sovereign and everyone must obey. And this is the social contract. Rousseau says something quite different. He says the social contract is not willing agreement, but a fraud against people committed by the rich. The powerful rich stole land belonging to everyone and fooled the common people into accepting them as rulers. Democracy should be direct, engaged, and everyone should have a say. So here is also Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who is very influential in when you talk about individual in the state. He seems to be a one-person catchphrase generator. He's often the source of a lot of the phrases that we talk about. Anarchy is order without power. And he also provides the punchline of my very favorite anarchist joke, which is, why do anarchists only drink herbal tea? Because property is theft. So anarchy, often in the popular mind, thinks about, anarchy is a synonym for chaos, people destroying things, thinking of Sex Pistols, teenage rage, scroll graffiti, and smashing things up and disorder. However, the reality is quite different. Many in the anarchist mindset believe order and collaboration is a natural state of human beings. Going back to Proudhon saying anarchy is order without power. Anarchy is a rejection of hierarchy and dominance. That's what it is. Anyone who was at the start of the mutual aid groups know what a creative time it was. Without rules and leaders, very quickly we started constructing processes and systems to serve the problems that we were facing. This is very different from what we are led to believe. And if you are truly believing that the only reason why people don't go around killing each other and stealing each other's stuff is because of law and punishment and the threat of the state, well, then we probably need to adjust your frame a little bit. People collaborate and look after each other. We live in society quite successfully where we are by and large excellent and lovely to each other. So this is Peter Kropotkin, who he coined the phrase mutual aid, and he writes about it. And he says that mutual aid tendencies are inherent in humankind. People do want to help each other. It is interesting that so many white males are attributed to be the fathers of anarchy and mutual aid, but these are just the people that write about it. Everyone else is busy getting on with things, living mutual aid and sorting out their own stuff, saving lives before the Red Cross and the UN arrive. Many of the organizers are women. Notice that? So we might recognize that there is more that than unites us than divides us. Mutual aid can be long-lived. Food Not Bombs, a direct action group against capitalism, war and poverty, celebrates its 40th anniversary last year. There are over 500 chapters all over the world. Capitalism's dirty little secret, the unspoken truth, much of the foundation in which it functions is provided by unpaid for labor of people who are doing things because it is the right thing to do, not because they are paid for it. A stable, functioning society is only possible through the collective efforts of many people doing their bit. The COVID pandemic has allowed people to rediscover mutual aid and how to connect our communities and make a difference to the lives of those that are close to us. Perhaps this will be a lasting effect on civic engagement, friendships, and sense of sharing and responsibility, and how nourishing being generous and kind with our time is good for us as well as others. Even once we've seen the back of COVID, there are times when mutual aid and community solidarity will be essential for survival. Unless we act now, we have many, many issues ahead of us. There is human-caused climate change and feedback loops of poverty that will mean that mutual aid will be the support provided by too many people in the end. So maybe we can start acting now and embed mutual aid into our civic engagement and know that mutual aid and kindness is part of humanity and it's where we should be. So that's it. I hope I didn't go over time. Excellent.
No, we're ahead of time. And yeah, let's just give a little silent clap for Clara there, because that was really, really cool. I really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. I think it sort of links up with a bit what I was saying about how this didn't seem like it would be a cause to celebrate, that we're still dealing with this 1 year on, but actually there is a lot to celebrate in lots of people learning about these modes of organisation. And actually the first point you brought up about mutual aid often being centred around food gives me a brilliant segue into our next speakers, who are Spruce and Eric from Cambridge Community Kitchen. So I'm going to hand over to them.
Hello, so I'm Spruce. I'm at Cambridge Community Kitchen, and thanks so much for having me. It's really, I love that presentation. I'm really excited to see what everyone else is up to. So Cambridge Community Kitchen is based at the pub formerly. So we're in central Cambridge, and having this really beautiful community space and this spacious pub kitchen, we really wanted to make sure that we were a community space in some way, not just a place that we hold up and lived. And the pandemic made that really difficult. Over the summer, we were able to do some meals. We did Chili Tuesdays and Sunday brunches, but obviously with the second lockdown, all of that had to stop. And in November, we got together with some friends from other organizations and decided that we were going to try to do a food delivery service. And we cleaned up the kitchen, and we found a collective of volunteers, and it's just completely taken off out of our hands since then, in a really, really amazing way. As of today, we have 99 volunteers, so if anyone wants to be the lucky 100th volunteer, Eric will tell you about that. But it's, we provide food 3 times a week. We deliver to 5 postcodes, and it's just been incredible to see it grow. And Eric will tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Spruce. I'm just going to talk a bit about sort of how you can get involved and some more specifics of what we do. So as Spruce said, we offer free meals, primarily obviously for people who are in need or have trouble accessing hot meals usually, but this is a service that's open to anyone. You don't have to meet any standard of need. There's no kind of gatekeeping of who's entitled to this or not. If you want a free hot meal, you can come along and get one. We take donations as well. So if you feel you'd like to give something back or whatever, you can take a meal and give a donation. There's no kind of limits on who it's for. As you've just heard, we've also take a lot of volunteers. So we're entirely volunteer run, and we have 3 main kind of areas that volunteers get involved in. So there's cooking, which is actually making the food, obviously. All our meals are vegan and halal, and we also try to cater for gluten-free and various allergies as well. Obviously, we're limited somewhat by the fact that, you know, we're making a large amount and we have limited resources and so on, but we can usually cater to most allergies. We do plenty of, as I say, like gluten-free, nut-free, whatever. So don't feel deterred. If you know someone who has specific health needs, we can always try and do that. So we have cooking volunteers. We generally have a team leader and then some people who kind of work under them. So there's potential there to either take a more leadership role and kind of have a little team going, or just to come and do some practical work cooking without really any of the responsibility. And then alternatively, we have our deliveries as well. So people can come and pick up food in person, and then we have a delivery service as well, which has been running throughout lockdown for, as Spruce said, people in central Cambridge, but also in the 5 postcodes around Cambridge. So we have a set of routes. There's an app, it's really cool, that kind of shows you where to go around the routes and so on. So all our drivers volunteers as well. We take cars, bikes and mopeds, like any kind of transport. We will give you a route that's appropriate to your transport. So some of our routes are longer. We tend to give those to people in cars and so on, but it can really fit your needs. You can also share routes and so on. So it's very flexible. Don't feel put off, you know, if you don't have access to a car or you don't want to, you know, take a route that's too long or anything. So yeah, that's delivery volunteers. And then we also have now and then we'll take people to clean, you know, prior to inspections and so on, and occasional kind of fill-in volunteers if we have a dropout from cooking or whatever. So we do have a rota, but we also take people one off. So you can literally just do one shift to try it out with no commitment, or if you're sure it's something you want to do, you can kind of join the rota. So yeah, it's a very flexible system with a range of roles, and linking back to what Clara said about kind of mutual aid and how mutual aid is run. We have this fantastic community space. It's a space that's kind of, it's a squatted pub. It's a space that's kind of inherently, you know, belonging to the community and kind of anti-authority. And that is our principle. We're fundamentally community driven. We welcome anyone both to provide food and to take food. So if you want to get involved, you know, please do get in touch and we'd love to have you. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you for that, Spruce and Eric. That was really cool. I've done a couple of volunteer shifts with CCK, cleaning the kitchen, and they're a really, really cool organisation to volunteer with because they're really, really welcoming of, you know, whether you can pop in and clean a little bit or run the whole thing, they'll find space for you. There's a question in the chat that Eric and Spruce, you might want to have a quick look at and answer, because I don't know the answer, but you might want to just have a quick look about volunteers and ages. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really cool. Please give CCK your attention and money. Next up is Jonathan from East Chesterton. So Jonathan, take it away.
Hi there, thanks for that. And thanks very much for that talk about the community kitchen. You told me lots of stuff I didn't know, which is really very helpful. I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully this will work. So I'm going to talk about East Chesterton Mutual Support Group. 1 year on, even before this call was set up and we were thinking about it, it's actually our birthday on Thursday. So we were slightly behind the curve, but I think just like was described at the beginning in the talk about mutual support, it was a group of people who all felt that we needed to go out and help people. So, and it just grew from there. It's quite amazing. It's a very organic organisation. So I'm going to quickly just go through some of the things we've done, some of the things we're doing now, and a few of the numbers really. And I'm also reusing a presentation which we put together for a community, for a volunteer social we ran earlier last year. So what we've achieved at the moment, well, we've had up to 150 volunteers. At the moment, we're running at, we think, 100. So we're one over the community kitchen. So maybe we should get somebody to transfer over. We also have a method of validating volunteers. So we don't just send them off to do jobs unless we know a little bit more about them. And that can actually be a vouching for them by one of our local councillors, or it can be that we've checked them out on the electoral register. So various ways we check it out. At the moment, we've got 93 validated volunteers, which is really helpful. So we have a big pool of volunteers who are therefore able to offer help as we need it. Through the year, we've responded to over 550 requests for help, and that's miscellaneous sorts of help. We'll talk more about what sorts of things we've been doing in a minute. We're also now working very closely with the Hope Food Hub, which is an organisation set up by Andy Atkins from the Hope Church, and it's running out of St George's Church in East Chesterton, just off Milton Road. It was running twice a week, it's now running once a week on Tuesdays, and producing food parcels and food bags for people on the same basis as the kitchen. This is there's no vetting of who's having this the food. Our only constraint is really the geographic area for deliveries, and we deliver across the CB4 area, so we actually do straddle East Chesterton, West Chesterton, a bit of Arbury, moves across, and so that's an area where there's continuing demand, and as you say, the number of deliveries in that has increased to be beyond our other requests. Something else which is happening a lot at the moment is prescriptions. Even though most people could probably get prescriptions delivered by the pharmacies, we're finding quite a lot of people would rather talk to us and get us to do that, and that seems to be a growing demand. We also do a bit of shopping for people if they can't get out, if they're shielding, and we've established a few relationships. I've said 14 here, and these are people who really just needed somebody who they could talk to on a regular basis. It wouldn't be a different volunteer every time, and that's worked out rather well and has helped quite a few people. We did a brief piece of work with the council, who had 50 households in our area who they really didn't know what the status was, and we actually went out and knocked on doors to find out how people were. And we've set up a dog walking service, so we've walked a lovely dog. So that's all stuff we've done in the past, working really well. Other things that we've done, we've set up mutual support. All of our work is really set up around WhatsApp groups. So many people have websites and other means of communicating. Ours is all through WhatsApp groups, and we now have 3. We have one which is a social general chat area. We have a mutual support one where people can offer help and receive help directly one-to-one. And we have a volunteer WhatsApp group, which is where we actually put out the requests which come into us by email and phone. We also have coordinated distribution of meals offered by local residents. So that's been quite fun. So Thai and Indian food, and we're hoping that that will continue. We've linked across areas like West Chesterton and Arbury. There's obviously overlap. People phone in from one area and we will then coordinate. We have quite a lot of conversations, particularly with West Chesterton, as you'd imagine. And we found some star contributors. The social WhatsApp group has been really good, and we actually have a number of people who post photos nearly every morning of the sunrise or the pouring rain or whatever's going on. And it's a really, really nice community has been building up through there. And then a couple of interesting areas of examples of the sorts of help we've done. It's not just shopping and prescription pickup. We've had to help out with people's cars. And then we had an interesting request on April the 1st last year. I'll let you read that one for yourself. But if anybody spots an elephant being walked around the area, it's our fault. A certain councillor nominated us for an award, and I won't embarrass him by mentioning any more names, but that was very pleasing, and we were pleased that our volunteers got this recognition from the council. And now what we're doing now is even more Hope Food Hub deliveries. That seems to be an area which isn't diminishing at the moment. We are doing lots of prescriptions. We're continuing to support the vulnerable people. We've had a bit of turnover of volunteers as people have gone back to work. It's been a bit up and down, but I'm pleased to say we seem to have a new crop, so to speak, at the moment, which is working out really well. Oh, and we're still walking the dog. So finally, just from East Chesterton sort of coordinators, I'd like to say a big thank you from us to everybody who's become one of our volunteers and has just brightened up the community in East Chesterton. So there's a thank you from us.
That was really lovely. Thanks, Jonathan. That was really, really good. Thank you ever so much. So because part of one of the jobs of the Cambridgeshire Facebook group that I made at the beginning was to pass on requests to the most relevant local group. I'm in basically every single Cambridge City WhatsApp, and I see them all ticking, and I have the notifications off, but I see them all ticking through. And East Chesterton is one of my favorites because there's always something nice. As you say, there's always something nice in there. And I see every so often I just, have a nose now because I don't have to do much passing on now because everyone knows where they're meant to be. But every so often I just have a little nose in the groups and I always see nice things happening in East Chesterton. So it's lovely to hear about that. We're doing really well for Ross has a question about, is there a way for people who don't have WhatsApp to get involved with East Chesterton Mutual Support? I'm going to be posting links with lots of contact details as we go through, and I'm sure there's one for East Chesterton that doesn't involve WhatsApp. I think there's a phone number as well, so I'll post the links as we go. Actually, given that we've got lots of time, Jonathan, do you want to just address that quickly? What's the best way for someone who doesn't have WhatsApp to get involved with East Chesterton?
We do have an email address and a phone number, and particularly the email would be the way to get through. If you don't have WhatsApp but you do have a smartphone, it's very easy to set up because we do put out all of our requests via a WhatsApp group. So although we can certainly talk to people who don't have that, and many of the people who ask for help from us don't use WhatsApp, for a volunteer it's really, really helpful to get it if you can. But if you can't, send us an email and we'll work something out.
That's great. Thank you, Jonathan. I will put all the links for contacting the groups in the chat in just a sec. We're doing quite well for time, so there's no need for anybody presenting to panic about rushing through their slides. We've got plenty of time. So next we're leaving Chesterton, moving over, not too far, but moving over to Petersfield and handing over to Meg.
Hi everyone, I'm so happy to see everyone here. Just a second ago, Mel was just about to announce me and my cat started playing the piano, but he's stopped now, I'm afraid. What I would like to do is just tell you 3 really quick stories that I think summarise this sort of philosophy behind mutual aid. And they'll be very quick, but I think they're really lovely stories. So the first story I want to tell you is a little bit about the birth, I suppose, of Petersfield Mutual Aid. And it's a really cool story. So how I remember it anyway, is that a lovely bunch of people, especially Mel, who just had a little chat about this, set up a Facebook group called Cambridgeshire Mutual Aid. And as somebody who was sitting around feeling very anxious and very frustrated about watching the pandemic unfold around me, this was fantastic for me and immediately made me start feeling hopeful again. There was a lot of people joining the group very quickly, And there were also other groups being linked all around the country. So lots of people doing the same kind of thing and in lots of different ways and sharing ideas, which is just really fantastic. We noticed that the group was filling up really quickly and that it might be hard to sort of coordinate mutual aid across the whole of the county. So a few different people started setting up WhatsApp groups that were a bit more local to them. So I put a little like WhatsApp link group in the Facebook group and said, hello, I've just moved to Petersfield. This is the Petersfield WhatsApp group. Please join me if you think you can help. And really quickly, people started piling on. And before I knew it, we had hundreds and hundreds of people. And it was really amazing how quickly people stepped forward to help. Within like the first day, my lovely co-coordinator Pete, who is helping us with the Zoom behind the scenes today instead of talking to us, he stepped forward and said, yes, I can help, and helped me with a lot of the tech kind of stuff. We had an idea to map the people that were living in the area and kind of decide who might need help and who we might want to make aware about the Petersfield Mutual Aid group. And really quickly, people started volunteering to help do the research and set up the spreadsheet and update that. And really, I hardly had to do any work at all. And I think that that is something that speaks really well to the philosophy of mutual aid, that it's really just about doing. And also it's about asking. So all I had to do was say, I think this needs to happen. What do you think? And immediately people just came forward in a way that I would have never expected to happen. And I just think that's really beautiful. So the next story I want to tell you is a story that was submitted anonymously to our August newsletter, but I think it just shows just some of the like really nice small ways but meaningful ways that mutual aid is helpful. So I'll actually read it word for word from the newsletter. So it starts, late March to mid-April, my wife and I went out for only a walk at a time. We weren't leaving the house. Our neighbours, a couple of younger Spanish guys, were doing all of our shopping for 3 weeks in April. We weren't able to go to the shops. We were in our 60s. Outside of that period, before and after, we actually did fetches to the shop for other vulnerable people who were isolating. So we actually did that about 1 to 3 times per person. I would post on our WhatsApp group on this street that we were going shopping, and people would just emerge saying, yeah, please can you grab a few things for me? Oh, and I borrowed my son-in-law's guitar, which was lovely. And we scoffed some unwanted but delicious turkey meatballs. And I think that's beautiful because it just shows that it's just little things that build up, and it really shows the sort of mutuality of it, if that's even a word, that they as a couple were helping other people and then people stepped forward to them. So that I think was just a really lovely sort of illustration of one of the ways that mutual aid can work. And my last story is about a time where I relied on mutual aid. So even as somebody sort of doing a lot of the organising and sort of behind the scenes stuff throughout the pandemic, I've actually needed a bit of help as well. And it's just been wonderful that I've been able to call on Petersfield Mutual Aid when I needed it. So a really good example of that is I was out shopping, took a phone call and dropped my phone and just completely obliterated it, smashed it, and it was completely unusable, which meant that it was very hard to do the mutual aid organising without my mobile. So I had one lovely person lend me like an old sort of brick phone that I could operate off, and did enable me to get on WhatsApp, which meant I could put a bit of a shout out and say, is anybody able to go and the repair shop for me? Because unfortunately at the time there was an outbreak of COVID at my work and I was isolating myself. And somebody messaged back within minutes and said, yes, I can do that for you. And it was all sorted for me within like 4 days, completely fixed. I was back online and back to my organising. So I think, again, that just really goes to show that it really is and has to be mutual. That even as an organiser, I needed help, and it was lovely that I could recognise that and ask for it. And also that mutual aid is as much about giving help to people as it is about asking for help. And I think asking for help is so important because it lets other people feel like they can ask for help as well. So those are my 3 stories about mutual aid in Petersfield. I hope that was fun to hear. Obviously, we'll be giving out links so you can find the lovely Petersfield Mutual Aid website that has loads of information if you want to have a look at that. And you can also use that to drop us an email or join one of our WhatsApp groups, because we have WhatsApp groups for each street or areas of street as well. So check us out and hopefully see you around.
Thank you, Meg. That was so lovely. I really enjoyed listening to that. That just felt like a comfort to listen to while you were talking. It was really lovely. Yeah, if you want to get involved with Petersfield, I've just put the link in the chat. It is, as Meg says, it is a very, very swishy website. Very nice stuff. And lots of people in Petersfield have been quite helpful, helping with stuff that's, I know, that has had an impact across the city and across the county. So yeah, lots of fab people there. Also, I loved your point about organisers asking for help themselves. I felt like I had to be quite careful with adminning a Facebook group with not wanting to look like I'd just created a group of 5,000 people to bring me free stuff. But stuff that I've received through mutual aid have included a set of toy dinosaurs that I now use in my classroom. So it really, really does can meet every kind of need you can imagine. Lots of lovely feedback in the chat for you there, Meg. That's really lovely. So we are returning to Chesterton after our brief trip to Petersfield, and we're now going to talk to Lucinda from West Chesterton.
So hi, I'm Lucy and I am from West Chesterton Mutual Aid, and it's been really interesting trying to get this talk together to talk about a group that actually I've never really met most of the people who belong to this group. I'm part of the coordination team and we've only met physically in person, sometimes by accident, a handful of times, and yet we've created this system that actually works, that gets people going out and helping others, and it's just incredible. I thought I'd start by talking about my route into the group. So actually I'm a photographer and I had to shut my business quite suddenly last year, and that was quite tricky. And I found that, sorry, I'm going to move to manual for the slides, not keeping to time. And I found that I had some spare time and a want to help in this desperate situation and kind of do something. So I approached West Chesterton, and the first thing they asked me to do was take a picture for the poster. And I wrote to Ellie, who's one of our coordinators, and she came back to me and she said, could you get that done by this afternoon? And I'm very much used to kind of things happening quite slowly in the sort of corporate commercial world and clients that I work with, but no, it was, can you do it this afternoon? And it was absolutely great because it was a great entry into the world of West Chesterton Mutual Aid, because everything is just so efficient and so quick. I just can't get over, even a year in, I put a request out to volunteers, and if I haven't heard within a minute or two, it's actually surprising. And if it takes half an hour to set up a volunteer, it's even more surprising. It's just incredible. So what we tend to do, sorry, I'm getting a bit thrown because my slides are not working. What I wanted to start with is just, how do you set a group up like this with just a blank page when the whole world is upside down? Well, my personal opinion, having come in a bit late, is actually get the team that set up our group. They're just incredible. We had a big bunch of coordinators. They set up a system that's really simple and really effective. What we tend to do is we get a request from a caller. They call in, the bulk of it is by phone. We have a few email, few WhatsApp queries. They'll explain the situation, keeping the data quite simple, and then we will go out to our volunteers and we will explain the street name of this person and what they need to do. Once we've matched them up together, they will then share all the information, so we don't have much data retention at our end. Keeps things nice and simple data protection wise. With the first thing that the group really did at one of the big projects was we created a leaflet, and this leaflet went out to, I think it's about 2,000 houses in the ward, and by the time I joined we were planning our second leaflet drop, which again I just couldn't believe that this had just come from nowhere. Once the leaflets had gone out, that's when the phone started ringing and demand started increasing with the leaflet drop. So I really feel that actually the leaflets were this massive project, but really beneficial. A lot of the people that we're tapping into are people who perhaps aren't familiar with WhatsApp, possibly didn't connect to the web very easily, and they were very much people who wanted to pick up a telephone and speak to someone and ask for help. With the support that we offer, we've also, like East Chesterton, we've offered out to other wards. So part of the joy of when you speak to someone is kind of subtly working out whether they belong in your ward or not, because we're not sort of pushing the work to the other wards. It's just you don't want to bring a relationship and build it if actually it's someone who lives quite a long way outside the ward. And also, of course, the volunteers have to travel more. We've also done a similar project to East Chesterton. So we offered people to go out and knock on doors to those that were considered vulnerable, just to check in on them. We've also had a really great newsletter that Clara and the team write on a regular basis, and that seems to have a very good opening rate and a real good feedback from people. They're really interested in what we have to say. This is the current volunteer coordinator group. So there's Marieke, Ellie, Clara and myself, all of whom are here today. We started with a team, and I apologise, I haven't had time in my preparation today to count, but I think it was about 7 to 9 people originally in the original group. Then people have chopped and changed as lockdowns have released and so on. And then one of the other things that we found beyond the high demand for pharmacy and food pickups, that seems to be our highest percentage of work that we're involved in, is actually a more social side of things. So some of the softer social side of things have been, we had a wonderful pub quiz set up by Lily, who I believe is here today, and she did a regular quiz for a group of people, and it was so popular that one person actually left the ward and flew out to South Africa, and while she was in quarantine actually joined the pub quiz from South Africa, which I think may possibly be perhaps some of the most far-flung support that we've had in Cambridgeshire. And then other softer side, which is fairly new to me personally, I think has been perhaps some of the social support for perhaps the older male parts of our community. We've had older men who've just rung and said, we need someone to talk to, we're just feeling very isolated, and perhaps they didn't have the other routes to find community. So we set up regular calls and we're checking in on them. And one thing I've learned whilst being on call is it's not just about the transaction of the job that you're doing, it's also about just checking in and just asking the question, how are you? And you'll find that sometimes it can extend the conversation by a good 10 minutes and you feel you've helped even though the immediate need hasn't been met. It's been a really interesting process. I think, as I say, we've not met any of our volunteers. We've built this team that just works super effectively. We put out a request for help. I didn't actually leave the house for a number of months at the beginning of this, and yet I was able to do good by getting other people and facilitating the volunteers. So it's incredible. One other thing we've been really lucky with, we've had the support of councillors Jamie Dale and Mike Sargent, who I believe are both here today as well, and they came and joined our regular coordinators meeting. They've been a really good route into the council and giving advice on various items. We've also had a a helpline for the council that we found really, really useful. And we've had, difficult situations, we've been able to ring professionals and ask for help. And for our group, that's worked really, really well. One of the kind of fun things that we've done, back in September, I was my business was shutting back down again, having tentatively reopened, and I think I needed something to occupy my time. And so I led a project with the support of the whole team to do an animal trail. And this involved getting various people in the community to decorate their windows with various animals, and with a view to people then going around and finding the animals, and we had some really good feedback, both from the people involved and also from kind of stories of young kids really enjoying it. We've also had support from the Rowan charity, who are very much centred within our area, and in the top, in the right hand corner, which you may or may not be able to see depending on what view you have, is Sarah, who is one of our wonderful volunteers. We've had many volunteers who are great, but she helped out, and all of these animals have kind of ended up hopping around various parts of Cambridge. In fact, there's still one up in an architect who've been locked down since Christmas. So I just really wanted to finish with this lovely image, which is actually Gordon the giraffe, and he was part of our animal trail, and it's actually the Cambridge Manor Care Home who were just so excited to be part of this, and they actually made the giraffe 3 stories. I think I just want to finish up by reflecting that for me, being part of the mutual aid group has been this amazing, powerful, personally great thing, because it gave me something to focus on over the lockdown. But more importantly, it's given me this confidence that actually I live in an area where people will just drop everything they're doing at the drop of a hat to fit in helping a stranger into their lives, and I find that an amazing thing. So to very badly paraphrase the Neighbours theme tune, I feel that being part of West Chesterton Mutual Aid Group has made me feel that everyone in West Chesterton is a good neighbour, and with good neighbours you get good friends. And I shall end on that. Thank you.
That was great, Lucinda. Thank you so much. Yeah, say all you want about Kropotkin, but Neighbours really did get mutual aid in a sense, didn't it? That was really, really good. I work in West Chesterton, and I walked past lots of these animals on my way to work when they were around, and they are so lovely. And it really linked to what you were saying about emotional support being such an important service that we can offer, because the whole thing, it's a year in, we're still in lockdown, it's demoralizing, right? And so a real thing that we can do for each other is moral support. That's really meaningful. More window plans, I'm really excited about that. Please put more things in windows. So we are leaving Chesterton again, leaving CB4. We're going back to CB4 right at the end, but we're leaving again for now. Going back to Mill Road, but we're over the bridge this time with Andy from Romsey.
So yeah, I've been in Romsey about, I don't know, getting on for 30 years I think now, and I've brought up my kids here. They've been to school here, and you kind of get to know a place. I'm sure I'm not saying anything wildly radical here, but what struck a lot of the speakers we've heard this evening is how, despite that, I've been awestruck by the response from the community. So within a week or two of setting up the WhatsApp, we had about 400 people on the WhatsApp saying they wanted to help, and we've helped about, over the year we've been running, we've helped about 200, slightly more than 200 people get through this pandemic. So we've had a committee running every week, including Peter, who's here from Petersfield tonight, but a number of people come together from the community to help us
put our organisation in place, and they've been tireless in their work. So it's been really good. Again, somebody earlier mentioned promoting, and we promoted. In fact, I think we stole that poster design from West Chesterton, if I'm not mistaken. There's some commonality in there, I seem to think. But yeah, we wanted to make sure we as many people as possible heard about us. So again, similarly to others, we did a leaflet drop. We did a couple of leaflet drops for the whole ward. Let them know we were there, and people started calling. We were using WhatsApp, but then we moved on to this thing called Slack, and it's interesting because the WhatsApp group got so big, and there was a lot of kind of personal information kind of being passed around, and we didn't feel very comfortable about that. So we moved on to a system called Slack, where we had a bit more control over personal data and could keep it a bit safer. And we had some great help, technical help, to set all that up. So these are three guys who all live locally in Romsey. We had help with the telephony, so we had a number which would divert through to whoever was on shift. We had a kind of shift system to answer the phone, and it would divert through to the person's phone. And there was a lot of automation in Slack to protect the data. And yeah, we were amazed by the way these people just came forward and said, "Yeah, I can do that." We've heard that story before this evening, but it was good. We worked. This is a picture, amazing picture from the inside of the mosque on Mill Road. I don't know if you guys are probably aware of that, down towards the Ring Road on Mill Road. And we built bridges across the community. This is just one example, but it's a good one. And in fact, in the early days, we were running a 24/7 kind of service on the phone line, thanks to these guys who were able to use their security team to sort of man or staff, I should probably say, the phone overnight for us. So they also helped us a lot with process and getting our sort of procedures organised and everybody understanding how the thing was going to work. And the really amazing response from those guys. One thing we kind of, I don't know, like I said, I lived here a long time, and I'm quite kind of active in the ward, sort of campaigning sense anyway. But there were some shocking things that were brought out by this pandemic. I mean, I think one of the things the City Council have done really well during the pandemic is help people who are homeless into accommodation. And so there weren't, for the most part, people on the street in sleeping bags, at risk from COVID, at more risk from COVID than they needed to be. And it was done really well. But what we did find was all the hidden deprivation. It just looks like an ordinary street of houses, a picture of Mill Road. And we found behind a few of those houses, there was some shocking stuff, frankly. So that's been a bit of an eye-opener for me personally, as I say, despite the fact I've lived here for a while. And built very close relationships with Cambridge Sustainable Food. So as I said, Sam Dio's one of the directors of that organisation who have been involved in a lot of the food hubs, started the idea of mutual aid in Romsey. And we've kind of helped back with finding staff for Cambridge Sustainable Food, and also funding the employment of some of those staff through seeking sponsorship for them from friends of friends. And so we've felt that's really good. As somebody said earlier, a big part of the pandemic response has been food, and so we've tried to help with that as well. And in fact, we did our own fundraising and use that money largely to support food hubs with food donations. And here's a picture of some of the stuff we bought with that money. So yeah, very pleased to be able to come on and talk to you guys and hear what you've got to say. So thanks.
Thank you, Andy. That was great to hear about. I loved hearing about the technology there. That was really impressive. I'm in East Cambridge, so Cherry Hinton, Coleridge area, and we are a bunch of WhatsApp groups strung together with sticky tape. So I'm very impressed by your by the tech you've got going there. I'm going to move on quite quickly, just because we're a little bit behind, only a little bit, but I'm going to move on quickly to Gail from Sawston.
And Beck as well, who's up first.
And I said I'd start us off because I remember when I lived in Cambridge, I had trouble finding Sturton Street. So I thought I'd start by explaining where Sawston is. We're about 7 miles south of Cambridge. We've got a population of about 8,000 in 3,000 households. And I've been living here for about 16 years. So I first heard about mutual aid when I had a note come through my door from a neighbour further up the high street offering help, and thought straight away that it sounded like a wonderful idea. It was just at the start of the pandemic when we were all panicking a bit and not knowing what was happening. And it was just such a nice note and so simple. It directed me to the COVID-19 mutual aid website, which was very interesting because even at first glance, it was quite radical. One of the first things that it said there was that lots of mutual aid groups don't work with other groups. So they don't work with the police, they don't work with councils. And the reason that they do that is because they don't want to stop anybody coming to them for help. So they don't want anybody who's worried that you might find out about them from other organisations to be put off asking for help. And later we did have a bit of a fracas with South Cambs District Council, which I'll speak about a bit if we have time. But yes, so we decided straight away that we wanted to be volunteers because I didn't have any work on. And, you know, it was at that time in the pandemic when we were just desperate to find something to do. I think there's that frustration of lockdown is also that if you know you're fairly well off, you really want to do something to help other people. So this seems such a good way. We were also, mutual aid was running on a WhatsApp group. And I think one of the first things that I did was suggest, because there were a huge number of people in the group, but very few of them were actually active volunteers. And I think everyone was already finding all that traffic and all that noise a bit much. So one of the first contributions I made was to suggest that we took off the active volunteers into a separate group. At which point, I think that was the point at which Gail asked me to join the admins. And that was very nice as well, to be sort of instantly accepted. Gail is somebody, so I got to know Gail through the admins and discovered that she was the person who started the group, and she's now going to talk about why. But I've enjoyed the fact very much that I've now got a friendship with her that's entirely based on mutual aid, and we've never actually yet met in real life. So that was also a strength of that network. Over to you, Gail.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So basically, as Beck says, I was really trying to find out what I could possibly do. My family and people really close to me live in other parts of the country, and so all I could do really was support them morally and from a distance. But I saw the Cambridgeshire group on Facebook, and I looked to see if there was anybody doing it in Sawston, and they weren't. I had recently lost my job, so I was thinking, what can I do to fill my time? And basically set up the group, set up a WhatsApp link, and off we went. And within about 24 hours, we had over 150 people join the group. We, as Beck said, we sorted out some leaflets, very simple leaflets, and people distributed them across the village. And we basically waited for phone calls. And I must say that when we got our first request for help, we were all really, really excited. We got lots of people just phoning us and texting us, because at the time we were just using our own personal mobile numbers based on the streets that we lived in. And we got lots of messages just from people saying, look, you know, I don't actually need any help at the moment, but it's really nice to know you're out there. So we instantly felt like what we were doing was actually of value to people. One of the first calls that I took actually asking for help was from somebody in Kent whose sister lived in the village, and he basically wanted to just make sure that she was okay and someone could possibly help her out. But we soon had lots of people who were picking up prescriptions, who were giving bits of advice to people. We had lots of the local shops getting involved, from the post office to the local spa, and everybody was basically helping each other. On one occasion, I went to our medical centre, and I'm so glad I took a really big shopping bag, because I picked up so many prescription items. I think I felt like Boots the chemist at the time, and obviously distributed those around the village. And really, for me, I felt that there was a real purpose. It meant that I could really help people. I've got to know lots of really nice people across the village. I've lived in the village for about 16, 17 years myself, and lots of us have never met. But I think we've really come together as a really strong group. And I think we'll always have that sort of togetherness. I think personally for me, one of the sort of nicest stories was a lady who had actually got to know one of her neighbours very close to her, but had never met before, even though she'd lived in the village for a long time. And she was basically invited to afternoon tea. This particular lady inviting her was Scottish, so she said they wouldn't actually be drinking tea, they'd be drinking whiskey. But the lady herself, who was going to visit her and having sort of done various bits of shopping for her, didn't actually have the heart to tell her that she didn't like whiskey. But I think that's basically, for me, why it's been so important, and why everyone's been really supportive of each other. And hopefully at some point we will all come together, and we will all be able to share stories, and basically just the fact that we've all helped each other. We all had good days, bad days. We all always we needed a bit of a sort of virtual hug and stuff, and we provided that to each other. And I think that's what's so important. And I think the other side for me personally was the sheer support that I had from the actual Cambridgeshire group itself, and various members of that group when I was really struggling on a couple of things. And I'm sure Bex will enlighten everybody with that in a minute. But I really couldn't have asked for a better bunch of people to really help me out. So there were times when I was thinking, what have I done? Why am I doing this? Why is this, not working out on this particular day? But the people in the Cambridgeshire group really sort of made me think, actually, no, what we're doing is really good. The good certainly outweighs the bad. And I think for me, that's what's really important.
Absolutely. I think we've definitely seen, what's interesting for me is the way that we both use the technology and use the non-technology as well. So one of my favourite cases has been a guy who found our details on the mutual aid website. He's in Manchester, but his parents live in Sawston. And he asked us to go around to see his mum, who wasn't terribly with it, to pick up some clothes to take to Addenbrooke's for his dad to have, because his dad had been taken into hospital unexpectedly. And just needed some fresh clothes because he was moving to a different hospital. But I think, that kind of thing, just sort of linking up technology and neighbours, and actually physically getting hold of people at Addenbrooke's, and then meeting somebody in a car park and handing over a carrier bag. That's all stuff that only really works for neighbours. So I think mutual aid has been really fascinating for me, that actually what was really needed at the start of this pandemic was something that bypassed problems with GDPR and data, and people who couldn't be contacted via the internet or social media or email because they didn't have any of it. So it's the sheer simplicity of saying, just stick a piece of paper through your neighbour's letterbox. And actually, because they're your neighbour and you're next to them, you don't have any of those problems. I think, the other big thing for me has been that there are so many women involved. And so this is a women-dominated organisation where we bypass bureaucracy and admin and paperwork and crap and just get on and help people in the simplest way possible. And I think it certainly made me very aware of the limitations of bureaucracy and the limitations of someone like a district council who think they know who the vulnerable people are and then realise they've actually got no way of contacting them or getting stuff to them. And we did find the mutual aid site, and I think some of the Facebook groups said just be very careful about getting involved with councils. And we had one guy who stomped into the mutual aid group on WhatsApp basically demanding that we helped him access vulnerable people and using us as a free resource. And when several of us with a lot of experience in privacy issues raised those with him, just basically stomped all over us and, you know, didn't want to enter into any kind of dialogue because he was the expert. He's also somebody I've had to, you know, point out that he was breaching privacy a couple of times in other contexts. And we saw it, you know, we've seen a couple of people on Facebook saying, yes, we helped the council, we acted as a resource for them. We ran around doing stuff for them and now they're taking all the credit. So, you know, I mean, yeah, some people say you can do a lot of good if you don't mind who gets the credit for it. But in this case, it wasn't that what we felt. We couldn't build a relationship with somebody like that. So it's been very educational in lots of ways. And I certainly hope that, yeah, we've got a really strong network that we can build on that's based on the people who actually want to do stuff, not sit in meetings talking about it or file endless paperwork about it. And that feels like something very strong and revelatory.
Thanks for that. It's really good to hear about that. And one of the things I was really keen for in setting up this event was to have a really wide range of groups which had different levels of involvement with local authorities. And I know that some of the wards in Cambridge City have fantastic councillors who are really on board, really understand the project, really an asset. And I think it's probably fair to say that you haven't been blessed with similar councillors in Sawston, from what I know about what you've been through. And you know, it's a big, like each group has had to negotiate that relationship with the local authorities in a way that makes sense for them, haven't they? And I think that's one of the things I really wanted to reflect in this event. So I'm really glad that you've talked about that. I'm just going to move on very quickly because we are a little bit running late. So I'm going to move on now to a different type of organisation, to Acorn, who are a local community organiser. Well, they're an international/national/local, they'll explain more in a minute, community organisation focused on housing rights. So I'm going to hand over to Adam.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Cool. So my name's Adam and I'm a member of Acorn Cambridge. I'm afraid I haven't got any of the impressive slides that some of the other groups have prepared, so I'll just tell you a little bit about Acorn and what we're doing in Cambridge. So I think Acorn was originally founded in the US in the 70s and then founded again in the UK in Bristol in 2014. And the Cambridge branch was established last year after a small group of people got it off the ground at the beginning of 2020. And then it became official after we managed to get 100 members in the summer. And I think we currently have 125 members, which is great. We're a union of low and middle income people who organise to improve communities. The idea is to build a union along the lines of a trade union, but where trade unions campaign for better conditions of employment, we campaign for better conditions in the local community. It's about building power to tackle inequality and social problems. So the union's belief is that economic and social justice can be tackled through community organisation and by taking collective action against people who traditionally hold power. So that's landlords, businesses, local authorities. And in doing that, you aim to get results for members. So maybe that's halting eviction or getting repairs done. I think Acorn's probably best known as a renters union, although that's not the only concern. It's not specifically for renters. There's also a campaign for better public transport, for bus franchising, which I think is how public transport works in London. But standing up for private tenants is one of Acorn's main focuses, and that is what we've been focusing on in Cambridge during the course of the pandemic, standing up to landlords and letting agencies that have been exploiting people. When staying at home is the best thing you can do to combat a virus, then you need to make sure that your home is safe and that you have a right to housing. So we're campaigning for an end to Section 21 evictions, which I believe are currently the biggest cause of homelessness in England. Yesterday, Acorn was mentioned in Cambridgeshire Live because Cambridge City Council has just said that it's going to commit to working with landlords to stop COVID-era evictions. After a meeting with the union, the Executive Council of the Housing, Richard Johnson agreed to encourage private sector landlords to avoid proceeding with eviction action during the pandemic. The government's ban on evictions has been extended on and off throughout the year. I think it was lifted briefly in autumn and then extended again earlier this month until May. But hundreds of people have already been evicted due to loopholes in the protections, which allow renters to be forced out of their homes because of rent arrears that they've built up during the course of the pandemic. Earlier this month, I noticed that Acorn Oxford were victorious in their landlord licensing campaign, which means that all the landlords in the city have to maintain safer housing and be licensed. And we've set up a working group here to try and get the same thing. So hopefully that'll happen in the not too distant future. Other than establishing and building the group over the past year, I suppose the main thing we've been doing is just looking after our members. So currently someone who is a key worker is facing the loss of her deposit because of conditions that existed before she moved in. I think it's almost £600 that they're withholding. And so we're asking for the full return of the money. She tried to reason with the landlady herself, but when that didn't work, she asked for assistance. So now we're mass emailing the letting agency. When I last checked, 57 people had emailed to try and make sure that she gets her money back, and there have been similar cases to that over the past year. We've been offering various training sessions and workshops to members, which are advertised on our social media channels. There's a Twitter and a Facebook and everything else and what have you. We had an eviction resistance training session very recently where we learned about how evictions work in the law, like the role of bailiffs and landlords and the police, and our rights and roles as resistors and how we work as a team. We have working groups like the Landlord Licensing group that I mentioned earlier, but there's also a reading group, and I've done some press training and door knocking training at the end of last year as well. I got involved at the end of the summer. I'm not one of the I'm not on the committee, but I was made to feel really welcome, and it was really easy to find something to do. Everyone was very helpful. I'd not done huge amounts of activism in the past, but I got a lot of encouragement. So if you are annoyed by bad landlords, then if you go to acorntheunion.org.uk, then you can find out whether you want to join as well. And I'm sure our membership officer would be really happy to answer any queries for you. Cheers.
Thanks for that, Adam. That was great. It's really good to hear about, and it's something that people across Cambridge and Cambridgeshire could get involved in. So yeah, do check out the socials and the email address that I've put in the chat if anyone is interested. So I'm sorry to have to move along quickly, but I want to make sure that we get onto our final guests, who are from the Cambridge North Folk Song Project. And they're going to talk a little bit about their project, and then they are going to play us out. So before I hand over to them, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to West Chesterton Mutual Aid for letting me kind of hijack what was going to be their birthday party and make it the birthday party for the whole of Cambridgeshire. That was very gracious of them, because they'd already done some organising work, and then I kind of just jumped in, and so thank you for that. And yeah, thank you to everybody for coming. It's been really, really great to have everybody here. I'm going to drop in a link to the after party while the music is playing. So if you want to come and play around in this virtual chat environment, please do. I'm sure it's going to be really fun. Clara promises Easter eggs and fun decorations, so you do have to bring your own drinks, unfortunately. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Stefan and Guy from the Cambridge North Folk Song Project, and thanks everybody for coming.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope everybody, you can hear me okay? Jolly good. Okay. We should have had this evening Emily Peasgood with us, and she's actually been organising she launched the Cambridge North Folk Song Project. She did this with the songwriters Anna Hester and Bob Hines. Excuse me reading off a sheet, but she sent me along a bundle of notes, so she was going to be doing this herself. And the idea was to work with local people to to write a body of contemporary songs that captures the spirit of what folk music is really about. I mean, you might think folk music as a particular genre, you know, sort of finger in the ear as I walk it out one May morning, but it's not all like that. And there is a huge variety of different styles of songs that have been written during this project. The original intention was to write about 15 songs with a small number of physical workshops, but of course COVID came along and put paid to all that. And when they started working on this project on Zoom instead, a load of other people like myself actually came along, and we've ended up with 35 songs, all based around the North Cambridge area, and they explore living in this area. They're very varied, as I said. They cover a variety of genres. And one of the things that's particularly special about this project is that when we've got all these 35 songs finished off, they are all going to appear in a book. In fact, I say when they're finished off, they are finished off. The book is currently being prepared, and this will be a free book available to all, and there will be no copyright involved. So it really is getting back to the roots of what folk music is all about. These are songs that people can pick up, they can adapt, they can record, they can change them, and we're not going to make a penny out of it. So, and that really was what appealed to me when I got involved. So I hope I've done Emily justice. I'll tell you a little bit about my song now. So sorry, this book will be available a little bit later on in the year. We're just sorting out all the finalities of it. So my song is about, it's called The Ballad of Mr Asbo. Now some of you will immediately know who I'm referring to when I say Mr Asbo, but others may not. Mr Asbo is a swan who lived on the River Cam, and he came to fame in 2009 when he started attacking rowing boats on the River Cam. Now, I haven't prepared any slides, but what I can do is change my background. So we think, if you can see that, we think this is more or less near Fendon, where Mr Asbo actually had his nest, and he would fly out from this nest and attack whoever was getting a bit too close. So that's probably one of the more famous pictures. And but he wasn't deterred by the size of the boat either, so here he is attacking a rowing 8. I'm not going to leave these pictures up because I did this when I performed this song at the Cambridge Folk Club, but there is a tendency for my arm and the guitar neck to disappear, and it can be a bit off-putting, so I'll just keep it as it is. So Mr Asbo, well, the students initially called him Stalin. But then he got the name Mr Asbo because, for those of you may remember, Asbo stands for Antisocial Behaviour Order, and it was suggested that an antisocial behaviour order be slapped on this swan. And it sort of evolved into a type of town v gown controversy, because the students said, well, he's a nuisance, we better move him along. And lots of other people said, no, the swans were there first, and it's their river. And there were a lot of arguments, some quite heated exchanges in the local press about it. And there were one or two personalities got involved, shall we say. There's a guy who was known as Battleship Bob, because he lived on an old grey houseboat that looked a bit like a battleship. And he famously disrupted a rowing event by just moving blockading the whole river with his boat. And then another intervention was by a lady called Michelle, who the local press referred to as the Swan Whisperer. And she claimed to have spoken to Mr Asbo to find out why he was so upset, which was not surprisingly because people were rowing boats near to his nest. Eventually, though, Mr Asbo did have to be moved for his own safety, because he got so bold that he started attacking motorboats. And the Cam Conservancy didn't particularly relish the idea of picking up diced swan out of the River Cam, so they moved him onto a river some distance away. Since that time, there have been one or two stories in the press about the son of Mr Asbo, Asboy, and then the grandson of Mr Asbo, Asbaby, but none of them have actually quite achieved the notoriety that the original did. So I thought this was a great subject for a song. I was helped in writing it by one of the songwriting team, Anna Hester, and who appears on the credit. She helped me tremendously with getting started, just on how you get the original ideas, and then sort of polishing off some of the lyrics. She stopped me from using a rude word at one point, and this is the result. It's a song called "The Ballad of Mr Asbo." It's got a lovely little catchy chorus that you can sing along with, but please don't unmute to do that, because there will be utter chaos. Unfortunately, you know, communal singing is one of the cores of folk music, but I'm afraid we can't do it here. But if you pick up the chorus, do sing along. I'll watch the screens and see if you can. So I've just got my crib sheet here just in case I forget, but hopefully I won't. And the chorus goes: for the lakes and motorboats, sculls, canoes and all that floats, I'll chase you all until you're gone. I'm Mr Asbo, the hooligan swan. I'm swanning along the river Cam, side Benditton shores, with my missus and my signets for to see my swan-in-laws. Paddling up to Chesterton as in a happy dream, when 8 great oafs in a huge long boat came charging down the stream. Those great big guys all in a row, with massive oars, they scared us so, to stop my family being harmed. I flew at the one that was small and unarmed. I saved us all from dreadful knocks, with a mighty peck in the middle of the cocks. Fours and eights and motorboats, sculls, canoes and all that floats, I'll chase you all until you're gone. I'm Mr Asbo, the hooligan swan. I gained a reputation as an antisocial bird. The students called me Stalin, and the tales grew quite absurd. Some called for my eviction, but some spoke in my defence. The swans were on the river first, it sounded like good sense. Then Battleship Bob in his old grey barge became my friend and led the charge. Started his motor with a clank, and steered his craft from bank to bank. He made the oars folk look like chumps when he went for a cruise in the middle of the bumps. Fours and eights and motorboats, sculls, canoes and all that floats, I'll chase you all until you're gone. I'm Mr Asbo, the hooligan swan. Then a lady called Michelle, she came and asked me what I feared. She whispered she'd connect with me, it sounded somewhat weird. But then I turned my anger on a motorboat or two, and the dear old Cam Conservancy, they said it wouldn't do. They said that I was a splendid fella, but it's not so clever to fight a propeller. They took me off to a distant stream. I hope my kids continue the theme. As long as there are feathers on me, my own swan song shall still forever be. Fours and eights and motorboats, sculls, canoes and all that floats, I'll chase you all until you're gone. I'm Mr Asbo, the hooligan swan. And again, fours and eights and motorboats, sculls, canoes and all that floats, I'll chase you all until you're gone. I'm Mr Asbo, the hooligan swan. Thank you very much. And now we're going to hand over to Guy, who's going to do another song, and he'll tell you all about it.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you very much for inviting us all. This is I actually ended up doing 2 songs for this particular project, and the one that I'm going to play today is the first one that I wrote about a rather interesting cricket match that I was very proud to play in, which was the very first cricket match that was played between the Haymakers Arms, which you'll all know, and the St Radegund Arms, which is currently excitingly going through a complete refurb, I see on Twitter. So yeah, it was the first time the Haymakers had managed to field a team not long after its refurb by Milton Brewery, and yeah, we had quite a mountain to climb to play cricket against the Radegund, who are a very fearsome cricket team. So this song is really about that, and I set it kind of a little bit like a nursery rhyme, bit of nonsense there, and I got the idea of imagining looking at a cricket field down from above, and if you saw it, it almost resembles to a certain extent a shield, a green shield with white dots all over for the cricketers. And if you're into heraldic blazon, the way they speak, describing that sort of thing, you would call a white dot a silver plate, in the same way that the Cornish coat of arms has got gold bezants rather than yellow dots. A white dot is called a silver plate. So this is imagining the first cricket match between the Haymakers Arms and the Radigan's pub as a battle of plates. So this is a battle of plates. I'll tell you a tale of cricket and ale and fearsome daring do. They met on a shield, half fetching fair field, 10 and 1 plates fought 2. With leather and willow, a great peccadillo, a battle of plates, glory awaits. The Haymakers Arms, not just from farms, cheered by a kangaroo. The team from the Saint, without complaint, let the first blow fall true. 2 bats and a ball, bells rise and they fall. A battle of plates, glory awaits. Well, the plates, they were told by a red beard so bold exactly what to do. And the beard said who's out, who was in and not out, and they all agreed and played too. The Saints, well, they made hay, the rest had a fine day. A battle of plates, glory awaits. Well, they ended up friends, cricket transcends, off to the arms they flew. Beers overturned, but we all learned this wasn't Waterloo. A battle of plates, this song celebrates. A battle of plates, glory awaits. Cheers.